I didn't realize my entire life was about to unravel the moment I walked into the office and saw balloons, cupcakes, and a crowd of smiling coworkers huddled around my desk. At first, I thought they were celebrating something I'd forgotten. Until I saw her. My replacement. The woman hired to take over my position before I even knew I'd lost it. No one made eye contact with me. Not even my supervisor. She just cleared her throat, mumbled something about organizational changes, and handed me a termination envelope as if she couldn't get rid of me fast enough. But the celebration didn't last long. Because when my replacement opened my files, those reports, logs, emails, and screenshots I kept meticulously, quietly, and out of sheer self-preservation, the office went silent. And within minutes, the truth that exploded from those files didn't just expose what they had done to me. It shattered the entire company. And it all started months before that humiliating moment. Long before the cupcakes, the fake smiles, and the firing. Before everything collapsed, my life followed a steady, predictable rhythm. I'd wake up before sunrise, pack a simple breakfast, and take the same crowded bus to the office downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. I was a data analyst, one of the invisible gears turning quietly in the background of a company that loved to brag about being diverse, inclusive, and forward-thinking. Words they displayed on their website like a badge. Words they never lived by. Despite the polished lobby and the cheerful wall art, the atmosphere inside always felt measured. Like everyone moved just a little differently around me. A small hesitation in their smiles. A stiffness in their tone. A pause before they spoke, as if they needed to adjust their words when addressing me. I tried to ignore it. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. After all, the job paid well and I had worked too hard to get there. For the first year, things were manageable. I kept my head down, listened more than I spoke, and exceeded expectations quietly, steadily, consistently. My reports were thorough, my deadlines were met early, and my performance reviews were always stamped with strong, reliable, detail-oriented. Nothing flashy. Nothing special. Just enough to make me feel secure. But subtle cracks began forming around the edges. Little things at first, being conveniently left off email chains, not being invited to certain meetings, coworkers whispering behind glass doors that went silent when I walked by. My supervisor, a woman who spoke with the kind of polished friendliness that never quite reached her eyes, began hovering behind my desk longer than necessary, scanning my screen as if waiting to catch me doing something wrong. I dismissed it all as office politics. Until the new hires started rolling in. Fresh faces with bright smiles, all welcomed with warmth and enthusiasm I had never received. They were introduced to teams in company-wide emails, praised publicly in meetings, and invited to after-work gatherings I only heard about when someone accidentally mentioned them near me. And though no one said anything outright, the pattern was clear. They all looked a certain way. They all shared the same background, the same circles, the same invisible advantages. And I didn't. Still, I kept working, kept pushing through, kept believing that hard work would eventually speak for itself. That my value would prove undeniable. But the truth was, my value had been noticed. Just not in the way I expected. Because while I thought I was building a stable career, someone else had already started building a case, quietly and strategically, against me. A case that would eventually cost me my job, my reputation, and nearly my sanity. A case that would only fall apart when the wrong person, my replacement, opened the right files. The shift from subtle discomfort to outright hostility happened slowly. So slowly I almost didn't notice. It started with tasks I had always handled suddenly being reassigned. Not because I was doing them poorly, but because we want to see fresh approaches from others. A flimsy excuse delivered with a smile that didn't mask the undertone beneath it. Then came the mistakes. I would arrive at work to find errors in the system that I knew I hadn't made. Numbers switched, columns mislabeled, timestamps altered. First, I blamed myself. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was slipping. But the errors kept appearing, always tied to my credentials, always small enough to be dismissed but frequent enough to raise questions. And those questions turned into conversations. Private conversations I wasn't invited to. Whispers traveled quickly in an office. They always do. People stopped asking me for help. Some stopped speaking to me altogether. I watched the soft shift of trust evaporate from their eyes. The kind that doesn't require proof, just suggestion. Just rumor. Then came the louder blows. A performance review that painted me as unreliable and careless. Meetings where my ideas were dismissed unless repeated by someone else. Deadlines shortened without warning. Tasks doubled without reason. And a supervisor who seemed increasingly irritated by my very presence. Still, I refused to fall apart. If they were going to come after me, I needed protection. So I began documenting everything. Every instruction, every email, every discrepancy. I saved screenshots, chat logs, duplicates of reports. Anything that proved my work was accurate and my integrity intact. Not because I expected to use them, but because something deep inside whispered that one day, I might need them. That day arrived sooner than I thought. A new face appeared in the office, Claire. Bright, bubbly, and introduced with fanfare I had never experienced in all my years there. She had barely set her purse down before coworkers swarmed around her, laughing, complimenting, welcoming her as if she had been handpicked by the universe itself. It didn't take long to notice something strange. She was being trained on systems I had never been asked to teach newcomers. Systems only someone in my role needed to know. First I shrugged it off. Maybe they were reorganizing. Maybe they needed backup. But then I saw my supervisor standing with her, pointing at my desk as they spoke. Claire glanced at me with an apologetic smile, as if she knew something I didn't. My stomach tightened. Something was coming. The pressure escalated over the next few weeks. Suddenly, every small error was pinned on me. Every delay my fault. Every problem my responsibility. It didn't matter if I could prove otherwise. The narrative had already been written. I was the problem. And then the moment arrived. A mandatory meeting. A closed-door session. My supervisor's overly rehearsed speech about shifts in management structure and departments moving in new directions. But before she could finish, a notification popped up on her phone. She glanced at it, frowned, and excused herself. She left me alone in the room for 7 long minutes. 7 minutes where my heartbeat echoed like footsteps in a dark hallway. When she returned, everything about her demeanor had changed. She didn't sit. She didn't elaborate. She simply handed me an envelope, my termination papers, and told me I had 10 minutes to clear my desk. 10 minutes to erase years of work. 10 minutes to disappear. I held my head high as I returned to my desk, even as coworkers watched with awkward, guilty silence. Some avoided eye contact. Others offered tight, pitying smiles that felt worse than insults. But the cruelest moment came when I saw the decorations. Balloons. Streamers. Cupcakes. All for my replacement. A celebration for someone taking the job I hadn't even known I'd lost. My supervisor stood beside Claire, smiling widely as she introduced her to the team. No mention of me. No acknowledgement of my years of service. Just a swift, clean replacement. Like I had never existed. But they made one critical mistake. They allowed Claire to sit at my desk and open my files. Because I had left them there on purpose. Not out of pettiness. Not out of revenge. But because I had spent months collecting everything. Every email. Every edited document. Every timestamp proving reports had been altered only after I submitted them. Every instruction that contradicted what they later claimed. Every incident that exposed the biased treatment I had endured. All neatly organized. All indisputable. Claire opened the first folder, expecting to see standard onboarding materials. Instead, she found the truth, laid out in a way that was impossible to refute. Her face paled. Her smile collapsed. She looked up at the team, then at my supervisor, then back at the damning evidence in front of her. The room fell quiet. And in that silence, everything began to unravel. Claire stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the floor loud enough to make everyone flinch. She held the open folder in her hands like it was something radioactive. Something she hadn't meant to touch. Something she wished she could unsee. My supervisor's smile faltered. She stepped forward cautiously, as if approaching a threat she didn't yet understand. "What's wrong?" she asked, though her voice already carried a tremor. Claire didn't answer. Instead, she lifted the first sheet of paper, one of the time-stamped alterations I had documented. The very one proving someone inside the department had manipulated my report after I submitted it. The room shifted. Coworkers who had moments ago been laughing and celebrating now exchanged confused, uneasy glances. My supervisor reached out, attempting to snatch the paper from Claire's hand, but Claire pulled it back sharply. Her expression hardened, not with anger, but with a cold dawning realization. "This isn't a mistake," she finally said, her voice too loud in the stunned silence. "This is evidence." The word hung in the air like a dropped match. She reached into the folder again, pulling out another document, an email chain showing instructions deliberately designed to sabotage my work. Then another, and another. Screenshots, logs, notes, proof that I hadn't been incompetent or careless but targeted. Coworkers stepped closer, drawn by the gravity of the moment. Their faces tightened as they scanned through the pages, the color draining as the pattern became impossible to ignore. My supervisor tried to recover, forcing a laugh. "This is all taken out of context. This is..." "No," Claire cut in, her voice firmer now. "This is a coordinated attempt to discredit an employee. And it's documented in excruciating detail." The air in the office thickened. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another quietly said, "I remember that report, she got blamed for that." My supervisor's composure cracked. Her eyes darted around the room. Searching for support, she suddenly realized she no longer had. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Claire held up the final piece. A detailed timeline I had created, mapping every incident, every altered report, every contradictory instruction. It was a chronicle of discrimination disguised as performance management. She looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw something in her expression shift from confusion to horror to guilt. "You were set up," she said softly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "This entire time they set you up." The truth didn't just explode. It detonated. Coworkers began questioning the supervisor. Voices rose, sharp and accusing. Someone stormed out of the room to call HR. Another started recording the scene on their phone. And in the center of the chaos stood the woman who had orchestrated it all, her authority, her reputation, her control slipping away with every passing second. For the first time since the ordeal began, she looked afraid. Truly afraid. Claire placed the folder gently in front of me, an unspoken act of solidarity, of apology, of courage. Then she turned to the room and said the words that would ignite the final collapse. This wasn't just unfair. This was discrimination. The truth had finally found its voice. And it did not whisper. HR arrived within minutes, their expressions tight and unreadable, at least until Claire handed them the folder. I watched their eyes widen as they sifted through the documents. Their questions came sharp and relentless, directed entirely at my supervisor, who had now wilted into her chair like a deflated balloon. One by one, coworkers stepped forward, not to defend her but to speak up. They recounted the meetings I wasn't invited to, the rumors they had heard, the strange instructions they had witnessed, things they had ignored at the time, choosing silence over discomfort. But now, confronted with undeniable proof, the guilt pushed them to honesty. My supervisor was escorted out by HR before noon. Not me. Not the scapegoat they had tried to turn me into. Claire approached me afterward, her voice hushed, apologetic. She told me she had no idea what she was walking into, that she never would have accepted the position if she had known. I believed her. She had been thrown into the center of a storm she didn't create. And yet she chose to stand in it with integrity. By the end of the week, the company issued a formal apology. A private settlement followed, one that acknowledged the discrimination I endured and the mental strain it caused. They asked me to return, but I declined. I had spent too long shrinking myself for people who never saw my worth. Leaving was the first real act of freedom I'd felt in years. Word of the scandal spread quickly beyond the walls of that polished office. Once the truth surfaced, other employees, past and present, came forward with similar stories. One voice became two. Two became five. Five became dozens. And soon, the facade of diversity and inclusion that the company had proudly advertised crumbled beneath the weight of lived experiences they had tried to silence. My story became the match that lit a much larger fire. Today, when I think about that moment, the balloons, the cupcakes, the celebration of someone else taking my place, I no longer feel the humiliation that once consumed me. I feel something stronger. Vindicated. Seen. Heard. I learned that silence protects the abuser, not the abused. Documentation is not paranoia, it's defense. And truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of clawing its way to the surface when the time is right. But the question lingered with me, long after the dust settled. How many others never get the chance for their truth to be exposed? How many stories like mine go unheard, dismissed, or buried? So I'll end with this. If you've ever felt targeted, sidelined, or erased because of who you are, your voice matters. Your truth matters. And you deserve to be heard. If this story hit you in the heart, remember, Intiqara Stories is where hidden truths rise, where silent battles are finally spoken aloud, and where the voices pushed into shadows get the spotlight they deserve. Every week we bring you real, raw, and unforgettable journeys, stories that challenge, heal, and awaken. So before you go, ask yourself this. If this could happen to them, how many more are still fighting in silence? Don't let their stories stay buried. Subscribe to Intiqara Stories, where every ending is just the beginning of a deeper truth.